Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Unnext News Radio podcast, your news source for all things unexplained. And now, here's your host for the Unnext News podcast, Margie K.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Unnext News here on this Friday evening, where we are every Friday night. And before I get to my guest this evening, I did want to mention something that is very important. I received a report from a pilot who had a sighting, and this occurred on the 7th of November at approximately 3:55 a.m., and this was a commercial airliner, and I can only give certain information out. I can't share everything, but this was a commercial airliner flying across the country, and as they got on the east side of Kansas City at 35,000 feet, the pilots noticed an object ahead of them that was extremely bright, very large, and a round shape. And then there were two other, a little bit dimmer objects that were flying around it. They could not identify what it was, and they watched it for a full 20 minutes before it simply disappeared. Now, that is a very long sighting, as sightings go in ufology. And the big thing about this is that other pilots also saw those objects and similar objects across the country at the same time. And since then, there have been a number of reports from other pilots, and then we're talking about very high up, 35,000 feet plus, for all of these cases. So, in the interest of studying this phenomena, if you would contact me directly, and my email is scrolling at the bottom here, if you would contact me and let me know about your sighting, I will keep everything confidential. So you can be assured it's not going out to the public. Now, this particular sighting, the pilot involved let me or gave me permission to use one of his videos, which I was going to show you this evening. However, when I tried to open it to upload it, it is not visible. So that's how things go in this crazy world of ufology and investigations. Things like that happen. But as soon as I'm able to, I'm going to make a short YouTube video, and you'll be able to see it. So this evening, my special guest is Preston Dennett. Preston has been on the show before. He began investigating UFOs and the paranormal in 1986 when he discovered that his family, friends, and co-workers were having dramatic, unexplained encounters. Since then, he has interviewed hundreds of witnesses and investigated a wide variety of paranormal phenomena. He's a field investigator for MUFON, a ghost hunter, a paranormal researcher, and the author of 30 books and more than 100 articles on UFOs and the paranormal. His research has been presented in the LA Times, the LA Daily News, the Dallas Morning News, and other newspapers. He's also been on a number of television shows, and he spoke at our XCon last year, and he speaks at other conferences and does lectures across the United States. He currently resides in Southern California, where I assume, Preston, it is a little warmer than it is in Kansas City right now.
I actually moved to the East Coast recently. I couldn't take the heat anymore, so yeah.
So now you're freezing. Are you in any of that big blizzard that they're experiencing?
No, I'm not.
Well, that's good.
Winter is coming, so I'm looking forward to experiencing snow.
Okay. Well, you're going to need to update your bio since you're not in California anymore.
Yes, I'm working on that. Sorry.
So, 30 books. Come on, Preston. Nobody writes 30 books. How in the world are you able to get that done?
I think you have to be obsessed. That's one qualification. You have to really enjoy it. I think that's another. Yeah, I mean, I love doing it. This is a subject I've been interested in for a very long time. I mean, I got involved in this field when I was, let's see, 21 years old. So that was a huge advantage for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just love doing it. I think this is the most interesting subject. And as you know, Margie, it has layers and layers to it. There's always more questions than answers, and there's always new rabbit holes and new avenues of research to follow. It's an amazing time right now, I think, in particular, to be involved in this field.
Do you think that UFO sightings and paranormal events in general are increasing at the moment?
Paranormal, I would say, yeah. I think people really are beginning to wake up to the paranormal and, for that matter, their own abilities. I think there has been something of a spiritual awakening. So I think the paranormal is definitely increasing. And I think people's awareness of UFOs is increasing. As far as the number of actual encounters, that seems to come and go sort of in waves. It's hard to say, to gauge completely. As you know, it takes people some time often to report their encounters or to find a place to report it to, or to gather the courage to even talk about it.
Right.
I do know MUFON and Newfork received a huge surge of reports, and it was the first half of 2020, but then it started to drop back to normal levels.
Yeah, we're experiencing a flap in Missouri right now that started in August, and it's been absolutely crazy trying to keep up with. We've got 20 investigators in our state, and all of us are busy.
Oh, wow.
So you mentioned the spiritual aspect of it. Let's dig into that just a little bit. How do you think that fits into people's experiences, and what is it that is the impetus for their contact experiences?
Well, that's definitely a loaded question.
Yes.
But I noticed early on, I mean, I was certainly initially interested in pretty much solely UFOs, but it became quite clear to me that it's a package deal involving a lot more than just extraterrestrials. I mean, let's face it, contact with extraterrestrials usually involves telepathy, which is considered sort of a paranormal ability,
Mm-hmm.
and levitation. And people report, all kinds of paranormal events, not just UFO contact. It seems to be part and parcel with a lot of other things, such as past life recall, near-death experiences, and out-of-body experiences, remote viewing, healing, levitation,
Mm-hmm.
precognition, mediumship, psychic reading. This is all really, I think, part of the contact experience. I don't want to lump it all together as one phenomenon because I think these are different things. But as a general rule, I think contactees become spiritually awakened, or to a certain extent probably already are. And that's one of the impetuses for contact, sort of a two-way street there.
Mm-hmm.
I think ETs are drawn towards people who are psychically awake or aware. And at the same time, it also causes a spiritual transformation within a person. So it's absolutely, I mean, I sympathize with the nuts and bolts crowd who are just sort of interested in proving this is a real phenomena and want to focus on the nuts and bolts aspects. But I personally feel like if we're going to solve any mysteries, if we're going to understand the totality of the contact experience, we really should look into every report, all the aspects of contact, and there is a spiritual aspect to it that I don't think gets enough attention, and is really a huge part of this, which I think it is getting a lot more attention now. That consciousness aspect and
Mm-hmm.
all the psychic and paranormal phenomena that are surrounding the contact experience.
And people seem to be freer to discuss it now and talk about it. And it seems to me that the longer a person is in the business of investigating anything paranormal, they come to pretty much the same conclusion.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, I mean, it's hard to add to what I've already said to that, but absolutely, I could not agree more. There is a huge spiritual aspect to all of this.
Yeah, it's becoming very apparent. How did you get involved in UFO research?
Kicking and screaming. I was dragged involuntarily into this field, honestly. I hated UFOs. I did not think they were real. I thought people who saw UFOs were hoaxing, hallucinating, or misperceiving, which is the old blue book kind of go-to. They were very skeptical, and I kind of bought into that Air Force narrative that there was nothing to this. And I was very scientifically minded, still am actually, but I know how far away the stars are, and I just assumed it was impossible that ETs could be visiting us. That all changed when I was 21 years old, 1986. I heard a report on the news about a sighting over Alaska. I actually remember the exact day, November 17. A report came on the news about the JAL airline sighting of Captain Kenji Torochi. You know that case?
Oh, yes.
Very great case. I mean, it's a classic now with radar returns and multiple witnesses. And these UFOs tracked that commercial airliner for almost an hour, I believe. A great case. None of that, of course, was in the news report. It was very tongue-in-cheek, very jokey. But I remember they showed the picture of Captain Kenji Torochi. I thought to myself, this poor deluded pilot has just thrown I did. It's really rude when I think back on it. But I thought, he's throwing his career away. Why would he do this? He's a pilot. People's lives depend on this guy. And it interested me enough because I remember my brother Mark, some years earlier, had come running into the house saying, I saw a UFO. And, I come from a pretty large family, 6 brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And, 6 including me. And we all kind of just looked at him and like, right, Mark, shut up. But now, having heard that pilot report, I asked him again, and he revealed a really remarkable sighting. He had witnesses with him. And I started asking other family members, friends and coworkers. I got a huge shock, Margie. A good portion of them, 25%, 30%, it had really dramatic encounters.
Yeah, that is a large percentage.
Yeah, I wonder if it was because I was living in California and we're kind of considered a new agey sort of place. I mean, I really started to wonder about it. How could I possibly know so many people who've had encounters? But then I heard a quote from J. Allen Hynek, and that really threw me for a loop when he's quoted as saying 1 in 40 people had an onboard experience. And I thought, no way. That's far too many. There's no way that could possibly be true because I would know somebody who's been taken on board. And it turned out I did. 2, 3 people, maybe more. I didn't have to ask 40 people. And it was, of course, not long after that, in 1991, that the Roper organization, a polling organization, did a poll tackling the UFO contactee phenomena and found 1 in 50 people show the markers of being a contactee. So I think it's far more common than people realize.
Yeah, I do too. I agree with that. I've even run into people that I know are contactees, but they're not aware of it. At least not yet.
That's always interesting, isn't it?
Oh, it is. It is when you're when you're talking to someone and a transparent ET shows up standing next to them. You know that ET is with that person. So
Right.
it can be a little crazy sometimes. So you have a new book. It is Not From Here, Volume 4. And obviously, you've had 3 other volumes that somehow I missed. Can you tell us a little bit about each of them?
Yeah. Yeah. These are all books that contain articles I've written for various magazines over the years, journals as well, like the MUFON UFO Journal, but UFO Universe magazine. I mean, a lot of magazines that have come and gone, Unsolved, Sightings, Encounters magazine, a lot of them which have come and gone over the years, and having written like 100 articles over decades, 35
Mm-hmm.
years, I started to realize that a good portion of my research was getting lost to posterity. And of those 100 articles I wrote, some were certainly sort of excerpted from the books I've put out, but a lot weren't. And I started one day just digging them up to take a look at them. I'm like, wow, I should probably take a second look at these. And I did. I thought
Mm-hmm.
this would make a great collection of material because these were, I think, one of my specialties is finding unexplored avenues of research, weird and bizarre patterns to UFO contact, outlying cases that perhaps haven't gotten a lot of attention. And I started looking at all these articles, and I updated each one of them, expanding them to probably about twice their size, and putting them together in these volumes, which I think are sort of, again, these outlying cases. And some of the subjects I covered would be like, gosh, let's see, UFOs over graveyards. That was one really interesting thing, which I had no idea was a thing, but it is.
Mm-hmm.
Dan Hynek has cases, Ray Fowler, Jim and Coral Lorenzen. There's a bunch of them. Other aspects would be like UFOs over rocket launches. UFOs are very much attracted to rockets. I found
Mm-hmm.
3 cases, Margie, where UFOs came down for toy rocket launches.
Oh, interesting.
Right? That's what I thought. So, I mean, that's how closely they're monitoring our activities. So I started
Yeah.
looking at, cases like that are really weird. I had this case involving a gentleman in upstate New York who said that he was receiving weird phone calls on his cell phone, which he thought were ET related. And that rang a bell for me. I mean, he had one experience where he's driving along and his phone made a ringtone it cannot make. And he picked it up and it said unknown number. And he ignored it until it kept ringing. And he finally answered it. And it was this weird kind of clicking, high pitched voice speaking in twice normal speed. And it said something along the lines of, "The time is soon. We are coming." And it freaked him out because
Wow.
he did end up having a contact experience that night. And when he told me this, because this had happened to him a number of times, I instantly thought of Bud Hopkins and his report with Debbie Jordan Cobble.
Mm-hmm.
She would receive weird phone calls on Wednesdays usually. I thought, wait a second, didn't that happen to Betty Andreasen? In Raymond Fowler's books on her case, he talks about this.
Yeah.
So that was another weird aspect. I mean, Whitley Strieber talked about how he had a conversation with an apparent ET through his stereo. And I thought, there's another case in Colorado I know of. So that ended up being a chapter in one of the books. But yeah, I covered a lot of things. Alien drinks, people who've been given liquids on board a UFO. Alien gifts, people who've gotten actual physical artifacts.
Yeah.
The breathing pool. This is a very rare procedure, I guess, that people sometimes experience on board a UFO, where they're immersed in this sort of vat of liquid, and they can breathe it, much like perfluorocarbons,
Mm-hmm.
that super oxygenated liquid, which our own scientists have been able to, keep mice alive for hours. ETs do this as well.
Do you think
To
they do that for healing purposes?
I do. I do. In fact, I've asked a couple of contactees who would be in a position to know. A book I did put out recently was called Symmetry, A True UFO Adventure. And this involves Dolly Safran, a registered nurse and actually a Department of Defense employee, a good witness who's had fully conscious contact her whole life. She has no fears surrounding her experiences. She doesn't need a regressive hypnosis. And it's really the most extensive case I've ever had the privilege to investigate. And so she's been able to answer a lot of the questions I've had surrounding various aspects of UFO contact. Having interviewed a number of people who've had this experience, I asked her about it. She's like, oh, yeah, they do use that for healing.
Wow. What is a UFO car lift case?
This is so interesting to me. There's a very famous case, which I heard pretty early on in my research. It was like 1988. And I'm sure you've heard of it, Margie, the Faye Knowles case in Australia, where she and her sons were actually driving along the Nullarbor Plain. This is in southern Australia, a very remote area along the coast. And it was late at night, and there's no houses or anything around. And this car passes them on the highway. It's a very remote highway, and it's being chased by a UFO. And they're like, oh my God, did you see that? You know, her son was driving, she was in the front seat, and the two sons were in the back seat. And they're, you know, not kids. They're, I think, 17 to 22, thereabouts. And they pull a U-turn, her son does, and they chase after this other car. And this UFO stops chasing that car and starts chasing them. So that freaks them out. They pull another U-turn and reach speeds faster than they've ever driven before, 100 miles per hour. And this thing easily kept up, obviously. It's a UFO. And it comes right over their car and actually lands on top of the car and pulls it up into the air. They don't believe they were taken. None of them have any memories of that or missing time. This thing just lifted their car up, carried it some 100 yards or so, and set it back down, somewhat roughly, I would add, in that the rear tire was blown out and they skidded off the road. This object lifted up and kind of hovered in front of them, staying there. And so they all got out of the car in a panic and hid behind a bush, wondering what to do. And finally, they get back to their car. They change the tire as fast as they can and take off. And this thing follows them pretty much all the way to civilization. So that was the first car lift case I'd heard about. It got international headlines. I mean, this was huge. And I thought it was unique, but it wasn't. Turns out you've probably heard of other cases.
We had a case in Missouri a few years ago where the car was lifted and then dropped back down, and it needed a new transmission. It had damaged the transmission. And I have another case where a UFO slammed into the top of the vehicle and crushed the hood in. But they don't remember anything else happening. They don't know what else happened after that.
There's a car lift case I know of in Missouri, in Union, Missouri, which occurred in 1978. It's fairly well known in UFO circles. I don't think most people know about it, though. The witness was Clara Winsher. And I like this case because it's got a lot of verification to it, and it's so unusual. She was driving through downtown Union, and unknown to her, there was about a half dozen calls from separate witnesses, independent witnesses, reporting a UFO over the highway in the Union area. And it came over her car at some point and actually didn't fully lift it up. It actually lifted up the back end of the car only. So she's driving down the road at a 45-degree angle with a circle of light around her, and she can just see the cement because she's on her two front wheels. I mean, this is something a car can't do. No. There are cases where these UFOs lift up a car on the two left wheels or the two right wheels as well. And a couple of other cases where they lift up only the back end. but scooted her along for a few hundred yards before dropping her back down again.
I hadn't heard about that case. I'll have to look that up. That's interesting.
It's wild. And there are some of them that are even stranger. I mean, there was a case which is very famous in Argentina.
Hold on. Let me stop us right there because I missed my break time, and Race is going to kill me. So, Preston, we will be back in just a moment. Don't go away, everybody. Medical Mary has the highest quality CBD products to enhance your health and wellness goals. Our cutting-edge formulas are not only made with the best ingredients, but also are curated to target specific needs for the body. Use CBD for energy, weight management, pain and stress relief, beauty, sleep quality, pets, and more. Our motto is people helping people. Start your journey into improved health and happiness with Medical Mary CBD. Available at medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. That's medwoman.medicalmarypartners.com. Or visit my website, margiek.com, for a link. I use Medical Mary and I love it, and it works. I sleep better and feel better thanks to Medical Mary CBD. Visit margiek.com for more information. Are you thinking about purchasing a wood-fired heating or cooking appliance but don't know where to start? The new book, Wood-Fired Heating and Cooking, will guide you through the process and make the decision much easier. Find out about wood stoves, wood-burning fireplace inserts, masonry heaters, cook stoves, brick ovens, and more. Learn about operation and maintenance, buying and storing wood, even how to make your own charcoal. A bonus section includes delicious recipes for cooking in a wood-burning oven, grill, tandoori oven, or smoker. The wise homeowner, prepper, or homesteader will have the ability to heat their home with wood when the power goes out or to save money on increasing gas bills. Wood-fired heating and cooking is available at Amazon. Visit www.woodfiredpub.com for more information. That's woodfiredpub.com. And we're back with Unnext News. This is your host, Margie K., and we are speaking with Preston Dennett today about his new book, Not From Here, Volume 4. Preston, has anybody ever crashed into a UFO?
Yes, this does happen. I've found a bunch of cases. Well, not a bunch, actually. Not nearly as many as I thought, considering how many cases there are of, close-up pilot encounters, which you were actually just mentioning in the beginning of the show. Lots of pilot encounters, lots of cases of UFOs chasing cars down the highway and such. And you mentioned one where a UFO came collided into an automobile. Yes, there are a handful of cases where this does happen. It's quite rare. Statistically speaking, it's almost insignificant given the huge number of cases. It's less than 1%. But yeah, it does happen. I mean, there was a very interesting case involving a plane that crashed into a UFO. I would call it a fender bender, not a real honest to God, head-on collision type thing. But on July 28th, 1994, over Mexico City, a DC-9 reported a UFO came right under them and actually bumped into their landing gear and did damage it. They did land successfully, but did damage the wheel hydraulics. This is a pretty well verified case. A gentleman who was an air traffic controller, his name is Enrique Colbeck, did go public with this. He was there when it happened, talked to the pilot, and what was really interesting is there were sightings in the days prior to this and following this. And it's not the only case involving a collision over the Mexico City airport. So there are, I found about a half dozen to 10 or so cases involving planes. It seemed to be a little bit more common with automobiles. And to me, perhaps the most interesting of them all involved a gentleman by the name of David Morris from Kent, Ohio. And on March 28, 1967, he's driving along late at night on his way home from work and sees this glow to the side of the highway and is paying too much attention to this glow because he sees an object out there in the field and wasn't really paying attention to the road in front of him until it was too late. And looking ahead of him, he saw movement and saw that there were several short figures crossing the highway, wearing jumpsuits. They were about 4 feet tall, very unusual looking. He slams on his brakes, but not in time to where he actually strikes one of them. And he did the right thing at first. I mean, he stopped, got out of his car, and was going to go investigate. But he's quite nervous about the landed UFO there. And looking at these things, he sees they're not human. And he became consumed with fear and hopped back into his car and unfortunately drove off. He calmed down for an hour or two, finally called his friend, and they returned to the scene, and they found skid marks where this incident happened. There was no other evidence other on his vehicle. The chrome was dented and scratched. They did end up calling the police, who contacted UFO researchers, and his case is now one of, I mean, it's not well known, but it has been thoroughly investigated, and it's one of about a dozen cases I found of automobile accidents involving UFOs that actually struck them.
What about houses? Has a UFO ever crashed into a house?
Gosh, I don't know that I've ever been asked that before. Yes, I do remember a case now. I don't know the exact details, but this is in Jim and Coral Lorenzen's, one of their series of books, which involved a small UFO, which apparently came right down through the roof. Have to look it up, but they were freaking out. It was this little round object, and it went right back up and crashed through the hole in the roof. I'm not sure if it crashed outward or inward. It did damage the house. I do remember that. And I know there's another case where a UFO did crash into a windmill. And I'm not talking about the Aurora case in Texas. There's another one. A water tower. That's right. It was a water tower, which caused a big to-do. There was a lot of damage. And people tried to report it as a meteor, except the witnesses said that what they saw was no meteor. It was moving far too slowly. I'd have to look up the exact date, but I believe that was Ohio or somewhere in the Midwest. But no, I haven't really thought about that, Margie. UFOs crashing into actual homes or buildings, for that matter.
Yeah, I just thought of it for some reason. What's the connection between UFOs and fertilizer?
This is something I always wanted to look into because of the Betty and Barney Hill case, which I won't go into because I think your listeners probably have heard of it.
Mm-hmm.
But real briefly, for those who haven't, it's occurred in 1961. Betty and Barney Hill are the people who introduced, I think, the world to the idea of UFO contact and onboard experiences when they had a missing time encounter in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And they first thought it was just a simple sighting, though it was clear that they had missing time, and they arrived home too late. Betty's dress was torn. Barney's boots were scuffed up. There were shiny spots on their car that were unexplained and magnetic, made the compass spin. So what was really interesting about the Betty and Barney Hill case is this was one of the first really popularized cases of missing time. And when investigators arrived, not Raymond Fowler so much, but there was two gentlemen, mainstream scientists, who were quietly studying the UFO phenomena. This is Richard Homan and C.D. Jackson, who pretty much disappeared from the UFO scene. I would love to hear from them, though, because they started asking the Hills all these questions that seemed somewhat irrelevant and off the wall. They were very interested in the missing time aspect, which kind of surprised the Hills. But then they asked Betty and Barney Hill, did you have any nitrates in your car, any fertilizer? And both the Hills thought, no, what are you talking about? But then they recalled that they did, in fact, have a bag of fertilizer in their car.
Huh.
And this interested Homan and Jackson because, according to the VAM, they had investigated previous missing time encounters involving people who were involved in the nitrates industry or had some connection to fertilizer. So I would love to talk to them.
Wow.
Because they never gave any details on that. And
Sure
that,
makes you wonder what the interest is, if there's some reason, some chemical that they need to use or want to take.
yeah, I mean, we can only speculate. Phosphorus does turn up in some UFO landing cases. It is a
It
popular
does.
chemical in the human body as well. But I thought, there's another case involving fertilizer. And this involved a gentleman by the name of Gary T. Wilcox, a dairy farmer, who on April 24th in 1964 had a UFO land on his farm in Tioga City, New York. And I dug up that case because it's pretty well known, I think. And he's a great witness, actually a former military officer, knows several languages, got references from his neighbors saying he's upstanding. And I think that's important because his case is very strange. He says that he saw this bright light come down, ran to investigate, and as he's walking up, he thinks, what is that in my field? Is this an airplane engine that fell from a plane? No, it's not that. He thought perhaps it was a refrigerator somebody dumped, but there's no way. It's out in the middle of the field. It was far too large to be a refrigerator. And he walks up to it, and it's a saucer, and it's floating about 4 feet above the ground. And he's walking around it, scratching his head, thinking, is this military? And then two figures come out, and they're shortish, 5 feet or tall or so, completely head to toe covered in a jumpsuit type affair, and start talking to him. He said in flawless English, no accent, and a lot of what they said he would not reveal to researchers who later interviewed him. He said it was personal. They did give him a prediction that an astronaut would die, which did turn out to be true. But he did say that they were very interested in what he was doing with his fields, fertilizing them. Questioned him quite extensively about that. Said he talked to them for an hour and a half. The whole encounter, he estimates, was about 2 hours. And they were very interested in the purpose of fertilizer and what it's doing and the various aspects about it. And he told them what he knew, and they asked for a bag of fertilizer, which he said, okay. And he went to his barn, grabbed an 80-pound bag, and dragged it over to the spot. By this point, this craft was gone. So were the beings. He was later interviewed by the Air Force and researchers.
Yeah.
And thought, well, there's another case. And I dug deeper, and I found a few others. I think there is a connection. It's somewhat tenuous because I couldn't find more than just a handful of cases. But some absolutely speak to it. I mean, there was another case which occurred on February 21st, 1968 in Winstead, Connecticut, where just briefly a little 12-year-old girl had a UFO land outside her bedroom window across the street. Little figures came out and didn't seem to show any interest in her, but went straight to the building across the street, an abandoned railroad station, which was being used to house, as you may have guessed by now, fertilizer. And, they seemed very interested in it. Actually climbed up the building, were looking down into the window, the sky light rather, down at this fertilizer. And I found a few other cases, so I don't know. I think it does fit in, though, with all the other accounts we do have of ETs collecting twigs and dirt samples, digging with their little trowels and putting dirt in buckets. And there's the Maurice Mass case in Valençol, France, where they're picking his lavender flowers. And we know that they are very much into picking plants and flowers and taking soil samples. So perhaps it fits into that.
It makes you wonder about crop circles too in farmers' fields. If maybe the fertilizer has something to do with it.
I hadn't really thought of that. Someone did bring up crop circles because there was a case which I included in this chapter, which involved a Mexican farmer who was growing supersized vegetables. He became world famous for it. I mean, it generated international headlines. This is extremely well verified. There's photographs all over the internet. And sure, people can grow oversized vegetables, but this guy was doing it regularly. All his crops were giant. I mean, we're talking 10-pound onions, collard greens, 6 feet high, cabbages that were 60 pounds. And everyone wanted to know how he did it. And he said he had a secret formula that was given to him from the ETs. So that when I started talking about that, someone contacted me and they said, did you know that people were taking seeds out of crop circles and that they grew, I think, abnormal size as well?
Yes, that's true.
Yeah, and I do know of cases where UFOs have hovered over. And there's a case involving a lady, I think it was from Colorado, who had a UFO send down a beam of light over her garden. And it accelerated the growth of the plants to almost twice their normal size. And her neighbors were like, what kind of fertilizer are you using?
Using ET fertilizer. Wow.
And I know other cases. I mean, Jacques Vallée has a case in Northern California where plants grew much quicker, where this UFO hovered. I think that happened in the Travis Walton case as well. Just recently, they've been research into that.
In the book, you present a bunch of cases of UFOs hovering over and even landing at dams and hydroelectric power stations. Can you talk about a few cases and why do you think they're doing that?
Yeah, this was quite surprising to me. I think, well, I'm not too surprising. I just didn't expect to find as many cases as I did. And it wasn't just objects hovering over them. They were landing. I mean, there were humanoids being seen in a number of these cases. So this wasn't just a coincidental flyby type of thing. Dams were being specifically targeted. I found cases stretching all the way back to July of 1947, which is, the modern age of UFOs and the Roswell crash and the Kenneth Arnold sighting and when it really all began, and all the way to the present day. And I have my theories as to what's going on here. I think one that is probably true to some extent matches what we know about UFO behavior in terms of them hovering over anything that's technologically oriented. So we do see a lot of cases of them hovering over nuclear power stations, anything, Air Force bases, rocket launches, as I mentioned earlier, anything having to do with technology. And I think in some of these cases, it's more than that. It's a well-known type of UFO behavior to hover over telephone wires. And
Yes.
Right? And the theory has always been they're scooping up the electricity that's surrounding the wires. Because, if you know about electricity, a lot of it does leak out of the telephone wires.
There's a field
Right.
around it.
It's not super efficient, and they can scoop this up because, according to I asked Dolly Saffron about this. She's like, yeah, they can scoop up electricity and use it. They need it to power their crafts. They're all about generating high fields of electricity, high amounts. And these landing cases at dams are really astonishing. There was one case which kind of comes to mind, which occurred on June 20th, 1964. This is at the Gorge Dam in New Salem, Washington, where a kid was visiting with his uncle at the dam when a 100-foot wide disc dropped down and hovered. And what I like about this case is there are portholes. This is not just a light in the sky, right? And this is the pattern of these cases. It comes right down. And he could see through these portholes human-like figures looking out at him. And his uncle was in the sort of electric house, the dam house at the time. He called him out, and his uncle came out in time to see this UFO, and it darted away when jet fighters came in and chased it off. And he speculated that it might be Russian, but it did cause a big to-do at the dam. And in fact, the FBI came to investigate the case, which shows that they didn't know what was going on. I don't think it was the Russians in Washington State. But I've got cases all over the world, Margie. Australia, Russia, you name it. There was a really interesting case which occurred in Italy. This was the most recent one, 2011, that I could find. This was at the Campo Moro Dam in Sondrio, Italy. And in August of that year, some 50 witnesses, a lot, saw this object hovering over the area. And it was 1 month later, a pastor who was hiking in the area saw a group of what he described as little gray men. And it was 1 month after that that a family was camping, and the son hiked off from the campsite and freaked out because he came upon a bluish, gray-skinned humanoid with large eyes, which ran into a disc, which took off straight up. So multiple cases at one dam. And what's really interesting is the Davis Dam, the person who was working there felt sure that they were taking electricity. And it does turn up in a number of these cases because there are power failures associated with this. There's a couple where they're actually taking water out of the dam or going into the reservoir itself and coming out. So I think there's a few things going on here. I think they are keeping tabs on our technology. I think in some cases they're siphoning electricity or perhaps water. But I asked Dolly about this because she's always my go-to gal now, the contactee who I wrote about. And she says, well, a lot of the reasons they're going to these is to actually check out the dam and make sure it's safe, that there aren't cracks in it and stuff like this, which kind of rang a bell for me because it reminded me of the Indian Point nuclear power station case where UFOs were hovering over one of the towers. And they later found out that there was a flaw in one of the reactors there that needed immediate attention. So I think that could be a possibility.
So they're watching out for us. That's encouraging. I know of in my own cases where ETs are helping, or they actually do healing on people, or they warn people about things that are. They also seem to know the future sometimes. That seems really bizarre. So obviously, do you think they're time traveling?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of simplified, but they do have the ability to time travel. I don't think we quite understand fully what's going on, but yeah, if you just look at the fact that they have the ability to basically reach other star systems, which would exceed what we think of as light speed. They're not traveling the way we do. You can't travel with propellants and reach light speed, because if you're at all into science, that will increase your mass towards infinity, and it's just not feasible. But if they're able to basically traverse the universe, there's an equation: rate times time equals distance. Well, if they can basically increase their rate to infinity practically, or distance, traverse major distances, this sort of collapses time. And according to the reports from contactees, there are people who've been taken into the past to a certain degree. Dolly did talk about this in the book Symmetry, or into the future to a certain extent. People are given messages and warnings. I did interview a gentleman, great witness. He was a Navy medic who was basically shown all these images of future disasters. The ETs, who are praying mantis, told him that since you started exploding nuclear weapons, you started what they called a countdown clock, and that all these events would happen. And he said it was like looking outside of a window. It wasn't so much a film, but it looked completely real to him. And they showed him all these hurricanes and earthquakes and landslides and major weather events. I had another contactee up in Maine who she was taken on board, and they told her, you think Hurricane Katrina was bad? There's going to be many, much worse hurricanes over the years. So yeah, I think to a certain degree they can see what's coming forward, and absolutely there's indications that they can travel into the past. I'm not so sure they affect it, with the whole grandfather paradox and all that, which you may have heard of, where someone goes back in time and kills their grandfather. Would that mean
yeah, yeah, that one.
So I'm not sure that's what's actually going on here, but I can tell you for sure they can do things that we don't understand, because contactees will be taken, have an hours-long experience or longer, and be put back, and only minutes have passed, or seconds even.
If any. I know of a case near St. Louis where a woman was taken out of her car, or the car taken with her in the middle of the day on a very busy highway, and was on the craft for some time, and then put back at the exact same time she was before. So that, obviously they can manipulate time if they want to.
Yeah, I've got a few cases like that. A lady in Georgia was in a car accident, injured badly. They took her from the scene of the car accident. She had a 2-hour-long onboard experience where they healed her. They told her she had actually died in this accident and she wasn't supposed to, but they healed her brainstem, which they said had been severed, and a bunch of her injuries. They said they couldn't heal them all. Some were karmic. She was meant to be in this accident, but they put her back in the scene of the accident, and this was before the first responders had arrived. They couldn't understand why she wasn't more badly hurt or even killed, but she ended up having, months of recovery, and later discovered that this had happened. She was not even aware of it at first.
Wow. That brings up a question. How many people have you talked or spoken to, interviewed, who do not remember right after an event happens, but something triggers their memory later?
A good portion. Yeah, that absolutely does happen. One case that immediately comes to mind involves a gentleman from Idaho let me think for a second. It was Everett, Washington. And as a young kid, he and his little brother and mom went to a drive-in movie theater. This weird fog came rolling in super fast. That was the first weird thing. The movie was canceled and they went home. And suddenly, as they're driving home, this giant spotted skunk appeared in front of them on the highway. And the mother saw it, and the younger son saw it, but the main witness, who I call Jack, that's not his real name, couldn't see it. He's like, "What are you talking about? There's nothing there." And they're like, "There it is. It's right." This was a weird screen memory type thing. Mm-hmm. And then they thought they saw a crop duster plane swoop down over their car. The next thing they know, 5 hours have passed, 6 hours, and it's daylight.
Wow.
And that's where it's remained for years, until he was a full-grown adult, married, 4 kids, and he broke a tooth, bit down on it, and cracked it. And instantly his memories came flooding back in, all the way to when he was 12 years old. And he was pulled on board. It's a long, drawn-out experience, but there were these beings around him who examined his feet and were doing this instrumentation in his mouth, which I think was what triggered it.
That triggered, yeah, absolutely.
There's always a trigger or a cue that will bring the memory back.
Well, Preston, I wish we had more time. I wish we had 2 or 3 more hours, but we don't this evening. But thank you so much for being on the show, and tell people how they can get a hold of your book.
Thanks, Margie. It was a delight. Thanks for having me on the show. You can actually get my book on Amazon or other online retailers. You can get it through my website, prestondennett.weebly.com. I'm all over social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I've got a YouTube channel that's growing fast. And thanks, Margie. I really appreciate you having me on the show. I love talking about this subject.
Oh, I can tell you do, and you certainly are dedicated to it. So thank you. Thank you for your dedication to finding answers.
Hey.
I appreciate that. Thank you for being on the program, and I hope you'll come back again soon. This is Margie K, and we are done for this evening. I'll see you here again next Friday.
You've been listening to the UNX News Podcast with Margie K. Any rebroadcast or duplication of this program or its content without express written permission from UNX Media or Margie K herself is strictly prohibited. The UNX News Podcast, in direct cooperation with the internet website unxmedia.com.